If you grew up near the Appalachian Mountains, you already know. Folks don't just make up stories out here, they remember them. I'd love to know where you tuning in from, and what time is it right now? Drop it in the comments. It's wild how many of us are sitting in the dark, listening to the same story, scattered across different corners of the country. Hit the like button and subscribe. It helps more people find their way into these woods, whether they should or not. Let's start. I've hiked the Appalachian Trail more times than I can count. But nothing prepared me for what happened that spring in North Carolina. There's a part of the trail no one talks about. It's not on any official maps, and if you ask locals, they'll either ignore you or change the subject. But I went in, not out of bravery, just curiosity. Now I wish I hadn't. There are places out there we're not meant to see, and I don't think I was ever supposed to come back. In early 2022, I took a solo section hike through a part of the Appalachian Trail that cuts through the Nantahala National Forest in western North Carolina. I'd been hiking for years, nothing extreme, but enough to know my way around a compass and a backpack. This trip was meant to be a 5-day reset. No cell service, no stress, just the trail, the trees, and me. I planned my route carefully, packed light but smart, and left my itinerary with a friend. It was supposed to be straightforward. About 2 days in, I stopped at a backcountry shelter and met an older man, late 60s, gray beard, Appalachian twang. Said his name was Hal. We swapped stories over a small fire. He mentioned an old trail spur a few miles south of Chioa Bald that had been decommissioned years ago. Used to be a ranger station out there, he said, but they shut it down. Said the ground wasn't stable. But between you and me, there's more to it than that. I laughed it off. People love their mountain legends. But when I found the turnoff the next day, a faint path marked with a broken wooden post and an old U.S. Forest Service "Do not enter" sign, I didn't keep walking. I turned. The trail was barely there, just a worn groove through the underbrush, tangled with branches and moss. I had to crouch under collapsed trees and sidestep sunken earth. After an hour, the sounds of the faded completely. No distant footsteps, no bird song, no wind. The air grew thick, still, like the whole forest had stopped to watch me. Eventually I found it, a clearing with a small ranger outpost half collapsed into the hillside. Faded green paint peeled from the wood. The roof was caved in on one side, and the front porch was littered with rusted tools and what looked like animal bones. Something about the place felt off. Not haunted, just wrong. Like it had been abandoned in a hurry and left to rot in silence. I stepped inside. The floor groaned under my boots. Dust coated everything. A broken chair, moldy papers, a shattered coffee mug on the ground. I found a logbook under a pile of debris. Entries from the late 1980s. Mostly weather reports and patrol notes, until one stuck out. Dated September 1989. Third report this month. Loud noises after dusk. Not wildlife. Can't explain the echo pattern, like metal scraping underground. No sign of anyone. Supervisor says not to document further. Will comply. The next entry, dated 2 days later, just said, "Something's moving in the ravine." I marked the trees. Don't follow the trail. If anyone finds this, don't go past the line. I stared at that page for a while. It didn't say what the line was, or what was in the ravine. But when I stepped back outside, I noticed something. Trees around the outpost had red bands of faded paint wrapped around them, maybe 30 yards out in a rough circle. Beyond that line, the forest grew darker, thicker. I should have turned around, but I kept walking. I crossed the line. Within minutes, everything changed. The trees grew closer together. The light dimmed even though it was early afternoon. The temperature dropped. I remember thinking, this part of the forest feels old, like it had been sealed off from the rest of the world and left untouched for decades. The trail vanished completely. I was bushwhacking through dense underbrush, ducking under limbs that seemed to droop as I passed. That's when I heard it, a low metallic groaning sound. Faint at first, then louder. Not constant, more like something heavy dragging along stone. It didn't echo. It throbbed. I crouched behind a fallen log and listened. The sound stopped. Then came another, closer, more deliberate, like a door, massive and old, grinding open somewhere deep beneath the forest floor. I wanted to leave, but when I turned around, I realized I was lost. The way I came in no longer looked familiar. The trees behind me weren't marked. I spun in circles, trying to match my compass with my map, but the needle kept jerking like it was being pulled. And then I saw the marker. A tall wooden stake driven into the ground with a strip of red fabric tied around it. Not faded. Fresh. Too fresh. I didn't put it there. Someone or something was guiding me. I ran. Not calmly. Not calculated. I bolted. Branches tore at my arms, mud sucked at my boots, but I didn't care. I just wanted out. I tripped and slammed into the dirt, my pack wrenching sideways, knocking the wind out of me. As I scrambled back to my feet, I looked up and saw it. A structure, maybe 20 feet tall, hidden deep in the woods. Concrete, moss-covered, like a ventilation shaft or bunker entrance. The front was sealed with a steel door half sunk into the earth. No signs, no markings. Just that same red fabric, nailed to the top like a flag. The air around it buzzed. Not like insects, like electricity. Something deep inside began knocking. Slow, hollow, like fists on metal. Once, then again, louder, and then again, closer to the surface. I stepped back, but the ground behind me crumbled. I fell maybe 6 feet, into a dry pit covered in pine needles and roots. When I looked up, there were shoes, 6 pairs, circling the edge of the pit. Old boots, work shoes, torn sneakers, no legs, just shoes, arranged like someone had stood there and then left without them. The knocking stopped. I pulled myself out of the pit, heart slamming in my chest, and ran in the direction that looked lightest, chasing sun, chasing air. I didn't care if I was going the wrong way. I just knew I had to get out before that door opened. I ran until I collapsed. When I finally reached a familiar trail marker, one of the official white blazes of the Appalachian Trail, I broke down. I stayed there for hours until another hiker passed by and helped me orient back to the main route. I never reported it. Who would I tell? The forestry department? The park rangers? I checked the maps again later. There's no mention of any ranger station, no ventilation structure, no spur trail south of Chioa Bald. But I did try to find Hal again, the old guy at the shelter. No one I asked remembered him. No entries in the shelter logbook under that name. It was like he vanished too. Weeks later, back home, I unpacked my bag. Everything was damp and dirty, except for one item I didn't recognize. A small stone, smooth, oval-shaped, carved with 3 straight lines, painted in red. I threw it out, but sometimes late at night, I hear that knocking again. Faint, distant, like it's working its way up from somewhere deep beneath the ground. If you've ever been inside one of those old ranger stations tucked deep in the Appalachians, you know they don't feel like the rest of the world. Something about the silence, too still. The air, too heavy. Like time got stuck there. I was assigned to spend just 3 days at a remote outpost last fall. I thought I'd be alone. I wasn't. In October of 2022, I was working a short-term contract for a conservation nonprofit out of Asheville. We were running a data project on black bear movements through sections of western North Carolina, including areas near the Cherokee National Forest. Most of the work was remote, hiking out to trail cams and logging environmental notes. For one 3-day stint, I was given permission to bunk in a decommissioned ranger station. Old Echo Post, they called it, roughly 14 miles off the Blue Ridge Parkway, accessible only by logging roads and a final 2-mile hike. The ranger station wasn't on any current maps, just a GPS coordinate and a scribbled note from my field supervisor. Pack in, pack out. Use wood stove, don't touch radio. Too old. That last part stuck with me. The station had been shut down for years. Power stripped, no plumbing, no cell signal. Just a weathered A-frame with a front porch, a rusted well pump, and a small detached shed out back. No one had stayed there in a long time. but the logbook said I'd be the fifth to do so this year. The hiking was quiet, eerie even for the mountains. No birds, no squirrel chatter, just a dull breeze moving through trees like it was hiding something. When I reached the station, I knew immediately no one had cleaned it in months. Dust thick as flour, a trail of leaves tracked inside like someone had dragged a sack through the front door. Still, it was shelter. Inside there were 2 cots, an old radio bolted to the corner table, and shelves lined with water-damaged field guides. One cot looked used, slightly dented foam, a crumpled blanket at the foot. I chose the other. That first night, I stayed up reading my notes by lantern light. Around 2 a.m., I heard something shuffle outside, soft but heavy like boots in wet leaves. I figured it was a bear. I tapped the inside of the wood stove with my metal mug to make noise and kept still. But then it happened again the next night, and the one after that, and each time the shuffling moved closer to the porch, then stopped. No growls, no scratching, just presence. On the second night, I checked the porch in the morning. No paw prints, but someone had leaned a long stick across the doorframe, like a crude barrier. I hadn't done that. No one else was supposed to be up there. I started noticing other strange things. The trail cam SD cards I swapped out during the day came back with nothing. No footage, not even a startup timestamp. The area around the back shed was full of flattened grass, like people had been circling it. The padlock was gone, but the door was still shut. I opened it once. Inside was a single chair and a cracked mirror hung from a nail. Nothing else. The mirror had a line of dirt across it like someone had pressed their forehead to the glass. The logbook on the shelf inside the main cabin was the last thing I checked before the final night. Most entries were dull, dates, temperature, wildlife spotted. Then I found the pages from June. Someone named GR had written a full paragraph. Stayed 2 nights. No power. Heard voices. Nobody here. Third night they knocked. Don't answer the door. Doesn't matter who it sounds like. Left early. Below that, in a different pen, someone had written, still here. That night, I put a chair under the front door handle and lay on my cot with the hatchet I'd brought for splitting wood clutched to my chest. Around 2:40 a.m., I heard footsteps on the porch. Slow, measured. Then the door handle turned gently. Once, twice, then a knock. 3 times, then a pause, then my voice. It's me. Let me in. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. That voice, my voice, came again. I forgot the key. Just let me in real quick. It was calm, convincing, but it wasn't me. I backed off the cot and stood pressed against the back wall, eyes locked on the door. The knob twitched again. Then the chair started to creak, pressure against it. My voice again. Come on, man. It's cold out here. You said you'd leave the door open. I never said that. Then came something worse, a second voice. Rougher, deeper. Let him in. You're not going to leave him out there, are you? No one else had been with me. I was the only one assigned to the station. The doorknob stopped turning. The silence was so thick I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. Then, from behind the cabin, fast footsteps, running across the leaves, around the structure, more than one set. I braced myself, holding the hatchet high, but nothing came through. I waited until sunrise. When the light broke through the slats in the window, I finally cracked the door. No footprints. No stick on the porch, just a small scrap of paper stuck between the wood slats of the doorframe. Written in block letters. You left the radio on. I left within the hour. Didn't clean up. Didn't check the shed again. Just stuffed everything in my pack and hiked straight out, heart pounding the entire way. When I got to the main road, I flagged down a ranger truck doing a perimeter patrol. I told them there were trespassers near the old post. The guy just stared at me. That station's off-grid. We haven't sent anyone up there since May. I mentioned the logbook. He shook his head. That logbook's still in our storage locker. No one was authorized to stay in that cabin. You must have gotten the wrong coordinates. I showed him the GPS pin. He frowned. That place was demolished 3 years ago. I still have the field notes. I still have photos on my camera, though when I open them, the cabin's always just barely in frame. The windows are always pitch black, even in daylight. And the radio? I didn't turn it on. But the last entry in my notebook, scribbled in handwriting I don't remember writing, reads, "They only come if you listen." There's a town in the Appalachian Mountains that isn't on most maps, and for good reason. You only end up there if something goes wrong. If your GPS dies, if a rock slide blocks your route, or if, like me, your car breaks down at exactly the worst possible time. I made it out alive, but I don't know how. Something about that place sticks to your skin long after you leave. I've never told this story in full before, but if you're the kind of person who likes to explore the unknown, let me be the one to warn you first. Back in October 2019, I was on a solo drive from Asheville, North Carolina, heading toward a friend's cabin for a much-needed long weekend. I wanted to take the scenic route. Something about winding roads and autumn colors always calmed me down. I was fresh off a breakup and trying to clear my head, so I turned off the highway and followed a two-lane road that cut deep into the mountains. It was a route I'd never taken before, one that felt like it hadn't changed since the 50s. The deeper I went, the stranger things felt. No cell signal, barely any other cars, and every mile seemed to bring more silence. Around 3:30 p.m., my car began sputtering. I pulled off the road near a faded wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Dunmore Hollow, EST 1871. There were no houses in sight, just that creepy, half-rotted sign and the hush of tall trees leaning too close to the road. I figured I'd walk toward town, hoping to find someone who could help me get my car towed. I didn't know then that finding help was the last thing Dunmore Hollow wanted me to do. I followed a gravel path for about a mile until I reached what looked like the edge of the town. It wasn't abandoned, but it sure felt forgotten. A general store with hand-painted windows, a boarded-up gas station, and a post office that looked like it hadn't been operational since Reagan was in office. A few people were around, but none of them seemed happy to see me. In fact, they stared like they were trying to decide what I was worth. A thin man with gray hair and a crooked gait walked up and asked what I was doing there. I told him about my car. He paused, looked me up and down, and said, "You'd best speak to Earl. He's in the hardware shop." He didn't offer to walk me there, just pointed and turned his back. "No, welcome. No, let me help you." Just a weird, cold detachment that made my stomach tense up. The hardware shop was dimly lit. Earl, an older man with cloudy eyes and fingers stained from years of working with machines, told me he had a tow truck but couldn't drive it out until morning. "Roads get tricky after dark," he said. "You'll want to stay the night." He offered me a room above the general store, said the shopkeeper rented it out sometimes. I didn't like the idea, but I didn't have much of a choice. My phone had died trying to reconnect to service, and there wasn't a single bar of signal anywhere. The room wasn't bad, small, dusty, with a bed that creaked but seemed clean enough. Around 9 p.m., I started hearing noises. Not footsteps exactly, but movement. Like people walking barefoot just outside the door, brushing their palms along the walls. I peered through the keyhole, but the hallway was empty. I tried to brush it off, but then the scratching started, soft at first, then persistent like nails dragging slowly across wood. I couldn't sleep. At some point around midnight, I got up to get water and found the hallway completely dark, though the light had been on earlier. When I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something strange, old black and white photos hanging on the walls. Not just old wrong. Every picture had a person staring straight at the camera, unsmiling, but their eyes had been scratched out with what looked like a knife. One of the frames had fresh splinters on the glass, like someone had done it recently. I went back to my room, locked the door, and pushed a chair against it. That's when I heard a whisper, not outside, but from under the bed. It was a woman's voice, hoarse and choked. "You don't belong here." I ran. Didn't even grab my bag. The town was pitch black outside. No street lamps, no moonlight, just shadows and the thick, humid dark pressing in on me from all sides. But I kept running, back the way I came, praying to God I could find the road before something found me. Except the road wasn't there. I ended up back in front of that "Welcome to Dunmore Hollow" sign again. It made no sense. I had run in a straight line, but I ended up exactly where I started. The town seemed to warp behind me, like it wouldn't let me leave. I turned around and saw them. 4 figures, standing just past the treeline, half shrouded in fog. Not moving, just watching. I shouted at them, but they didn't answer. When I stepped forward, they stepped back. When I stepped back, they stepped forward in sync, like a mirror but warped. Panicked, I ducked off the path and ran through the woods. The trees felt alive, branches snagged my clothes, thorns tore into my skin, and it felt like something was hurting me, forcing me deeper. Eventually, I saw lights, flickering orange flames up ahead. A clearing. I crawled forward until I could make out what was there. A circle of people stood around a fire. They wore simple clothes, like out of the 1800s. Some held hands, others chanted under their breath. And in the center was a woman, kneeling with a sack over her head. Earl was there. So was the man from earlier. So were others I hadn't seen. It wasn't a town, it was a trap. I watched in horror as they lifted the sack off the woman's head. She looked no older than 20. Her eyes were swollen shut. She didn't scream. She didn't move. They raised their hands in unison. And then she vanished. Not ran. Not was taken. She just disappeared. One moment there. The next gone. Every person turned and looked in my direction. I ran again. I don't remember how I found the road. I don't remember falling or scraping my knees or crawling out of the woods. I only remember the sound of gravel under my feet when I saw headlights in the distance. It was a state trooper. He pulled over when he saw me stumbling and bloody and wild-eyed. I tried to tell him everything, but the words wouldn't come out right. He assumed I'd crashed or been mugged. He drove me into the next town over and called in medical help. I stayed in a hospital for a day. They ran tests. Said I was dehydrated, confused, probably hallucinating. When I asked about Dunmore Hollow, the nurse's face froze. "That's not a place," she said. "Not anymore." I insisted. Described the road, the people, the sign. She nodded slowly and said, "You must mean what used to be Dunmore. They shut that place down after the mine collapse in the 70s. Town got buried. Ain't been anything out there in decades." I went back weeks later, rented a Jeep, took the exact same route. The road passed mile marker 38. Gone. Just thick brush, no sign, no gravel path, no remnants of any town. I walked a bit into the woods and found nothing. Just silence. But when I turned to leave, I saw something nailed to a tree just behind me. An old black and white photograph. Of me, standing in front of the Dunmore Hollow sign. Eyes scratched out. In May 2018, I decided to hike a solo section of the Appalachian Trail between North Carolina and Tennessee. I'd just left my job of 5 years, and after the burnout, the anxiety, the office politics, I needed a reset. The plan was simple: for days, slow pace, camping along the way. I'd trained for this. I wasn't new to hiking. I'd done plenty of solo overnights and backcountry trips. But I hadn't hiked this part of the trail before, and something about it felt quieter. Too quiet. The first 2 days went smoothly. I crossed paths with a few other hikers, mostly through hikers heading north. Everyone was friendly, if a little reserved. The deeper I went, the more the sounds of the forest seemed to fade into a low, breath-like hush. That's the only way I can describe it. Not wind, not wildlife. Just this ambient stillness that felt like the woods were holding their breath. I made camp on the second night near an old trail shelter, a basic 3-walled structure with a slanted roof and a fire ring out front. That's when things started getting strange. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in my sleeping bag, every crack of a twig sounding too close. Around 2:30 a.m., I heard soft footsteps. I froze. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe another hiker, but the steps were deliberate, too slow, too controlled. I peeked out from my bag and saw nothing. Then I heard it again, this time from the other side of the shelter wall. I stayed completely still, breathing as quietly as I could. After a few minutes, the footsteps faded. No voices, no lights, Just that strange hush in the trees. I didn't sleep at all after that. At dawn, I packed up quickly and continued north, my senses sharp. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt watched. Every rustle, every snapping branch felt too intentional. Around midday, I veered slightly off the main trail to refill my water from a spring I'd marked on my map. The spring was maybe 200 feet off the trail, down a slope covered in moss and pine needles. When I got there, I noticed something weird: boot prints. Fresh ones. A single set, leading past the spring toward a denser part of the woods. I paused. Nothing in that direction on my map. No trail, no landmarks. But curiosity got the better of me, and I followed them. I walked for maybe 10 minutes before the terrain changed. It wasn't just rough, it was unnatural. Trees grew at strange angles, some leaning together like arches. The light dimmed, though the sky was clear. That's when I saw it. A clearing with an old wooden structure, almost like a collapsed cabin. But it didn't look like it had simply fallen apart. It looked stripped, like someone had taken pieces of it methodically over time. The boot prints led directly to it. I moved closer. Around the perimeter were markings, rocks arranged in rings, animal bones scattered with odd precision. Not a hunting site, not a campsite, something else. I crouched near one of the rings and noticed a piece of fabric, military camo, faded and torn. I didn't touch it. My stomach turned, and my instincts screamed at me to leave. As I turned, I heard something behind me. Not footsteps. Breathing. I whipped around. Nothing. Then I saw a figure, just at the edge of the clearing. A man, maybe in his 40s or 50s, shirtless, pale, standing between two trees. Not moving. Watching. I called out, but he didn't react. Just stared. His eyes were wide, unblinking. I didn't wait for anything else. I turned and ran, full sprint, back through the brush, following the faint trail of crushed pine needles until I reached the spring, then back to the main trail. But something was off. The trail didn't look right. The trees were in the wrong places. The markers, white blazes on the trunks, were gone. I should have been heading north, but every direction felt wrong. I wandered for hours, trying to relocate the trail. My compass needle twitched like it couldn't decide where north was. The GPS on my watch refused to load. And the worst part, I never heard a single bird. Not even insects. The forest was dead silent, like I'd crossed into a bubble of nothing. Just before sunset, I saw movement again, 3 figures spaced apart, just far enough to be blurry. They weren't hikers. They didn't carry gear. They stood too still. I ducked behind a log and held my breath. After a while, they moved slowly in my direction. Not running, not calling out, just walking. I panicked and scrambled uphill, tearing through the brush. My legs burned. Branches whipped my face. But I didn't stop until I hit a ridgeline. From there, I finally saw it. An old fire tower in the distance, poking above the treetops like a lifeline. I bolted toward it. When I reached the tower, I climbed the rusted ladder as fast as I could. From the top, I could see the forest stretch endlessly in every direction, but no people. The figures were gone. But there, to the west, I spotted the faint white blaze of the the real trail. I waited until morning. No sleep. Just sat in that tower, staring down at the woods, clutching my knife, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. At sunrise, I made my way back down, reconnected with the trail, and hiked for nearly 12 hours straight until I reached a trailhead with a parking lot and a group of campers. I didn't say a word to them. I got in my car and drove, shaking the whole time. Back home, I tried to find any mention of the clearing or others who'd seen strange things on that part of the trail. Reddit, old hiking forums, even local archives. Most people brushed it off, just bad terrain. Probably moonshiners. You hallucinated. But then I found a post, just one, from someone who'd hiked that same stretch in 2016. They described a quiet zone in the forest where the markers disappeared and where they felt like they were being stalked. They mentioned seeing a man with no shirt standing dead still in the trees. The post had no replies. The user hadn't posted since. I reached out to local rangers to report what I saw. They told me there were no structures out there, certainly not a cabin or fire tower. I insisted. I even gave coordinates I'd memorized from my watch once it started working again. They said those coordinates led to a steep ravine, inaccessible on foot. 2 months later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph, black and white, clearly taken with an old camera. It showed the clearing I'd stumbled into. The same stripped structure, same ring of stones. And standing in the background, partially hidden by the trees, was me. I hadn't taken any photos. I hadn't seen anyone else. I don't know who sent it. I haven't hiked alone since. I thought I was just going camping. A quiet solo trip into the Appalachian woods, away from people, away from everything. What I found out, there wasn't just isolation. It was a community buried deep in the trees, living by their own rules, practicing something that felt older than religion. I saw something I wasn't meant to, and I think they knew I saw it. I should have turned back when I noticed the deer bones in a circle. It was early September 2022, right after Labor Day weekend. I had a 4-day break from work and decided to go off the grid. I'd been pushing myself hard all summer, long hours, little sleep, burnout creeping in. I figured a solo camping trip in the Appalachians would help me reset. I picked a lesser-known section of trail in western North Carolina, not far from the Tennessee line. It wasn't totally remote, but it didn't see much foot traffic either. Perfect. I parked at a trailhead just before noon and planned to hike about 6 miles in before setting up camp. I had my pack, enough food and water, a tarp, and a journal. I didn't bring a gun, just a knife and bear spray. I wasn't worried. I'd done trips like this before. The trail started narrow, then widened as it wound through switchbacks, fern-covered hollows, and thick pines. By 5 p.m., I'd found a ridge with a good view and set up camp beneath an outcrop. I ate, wrote in my journal, and turned in early. I didn't realize until the second night just how strange the woods had become around me. The first night was peaceful. A few rustles, maybe a distant owl. Normal forest sounds. But the second night felt off. It started with silence, the kind that makes your ears ring. No bugs, no wind, just an unnatural stillness that settled over my camp like a fog. I sat by my small fire and noticed what looked like flickering light far down the hill to the east. It was faint, maybe a reflection or someone else camping, I figured. I turned off my fire early and listened. That's when I heard it, low humming. Human voices, but not words I could understand. It came and went, like a chant carried on the wind. Curious, I grabbed my headlamp, turned it on low red mode, and followed the sound carefully down the ridge. After maybe 15 minutes of slow, quiet hiking, I stopped behind a tree and ducked low. Below me was a clearing I hadn't seen on my map. In it were 6 or 7 people in ragged clothes, standing in a loose circle. They were holding something, sticks maybe, but I couldn't make it out. A fire burned at the center. Around it, hanging from stakes, were animal bones, deer legs, ribs, even skulls. Arranged carefully, almost like an altar. The chanting got louder, rising and falling in rhythm. One of the people stepped forward and knelt at the fire, muttering something I couldn't hear. Then another person brought something out from a sack, an animal, maybe a raccoon or a possum, and handed it to the kneeling man. He raised it in both hands like an offering. I couldn't move. My breath was shallow, my heart pounding. These weren't backpackers or campers. No gear, no tents, no flashlights. They moved like they'd done this 1,000 times. Then something shifted. The one holding the animal stopped and looked up sharply, straight toward where I was crouched. I didn't move, didn't blink, barely even breathed. But they saw me. The others turned slowly. Not startled, not confused, just aware, like they'd been expecting me. I backed away, careful not to snap twigs. When I got a few dozen feet away, I turned and bolted. I didn't go back to my camp. I ran in the opposite direction, relying on my compass to get me back to the trail. I ran for what felt like an hour before I stopped to catch my breath. My legs burned. My mouth was dry. And that's when I noticed something that made me freeze all over again. The woods around me had changed. The trees were older, gnarled, clustered too tight together. The moss underfoot was thick, unnatural. I checked my GPS. No signal. Not even a blinking cursor. Just a blank screen. I tried to follow the slope downward, thinking it might lead to a stream or trail. That's when I saw another clearing. This one was smaller, no fire, no people. Just a flat circle of packed dirt, with more bones arranged in a spiral. In the center, carved deep into the ground, was a symbol I didn't recognize. Sharp edges, interlocking shapes. It didn't look new. I took one step into the clearing, and every hair on my body stood up. Not fear, instinct. I backed out, retraced my path uphill, and started circling wide, hoping to find familiar terrain. But night was falling, and I still had to sleep somewhere. By the time I found a flat patch of ground far from the ritual site, it was fully dark. I didn't build a fire. I didn't even unroll my sleeping bag. I laid down beneath a tree with my pack still on, knife in hand, trying not to panic. Around 1 or 2 a.m., I heard it again. The chanting, closer this time. It drifted through the trees, winding around the trunks like smoke. I pressed myself into the dirt. Something moved past me, a person, barefoot, walking slowly between the trees, humming the same low tune I'd heard at the clearing. I didn't dare look directly at them. Then I heard whispering behind me. A second figure was crouched, maybe 15 feet away, rocking slightly, humming to themselves. I don't know how long they stayed there. Time didn't feel real anymore. At some point, the humming stopped. The woods went quiet again, but I didn't move. As dawn broke, I finally sat up. No one was around. No footprints. No signs of people. Except one thing. A small bundle of twine, feathers, and bones tied to the base of the tree I'd slept under. Deliberately placed. Like a mark. I grabbed my things and began moving fast, due west, checking the sun every hour, trying to find a stream or road. I didn't stop for food. I didn't stop to rest. I just kept walking. Eventually, I found a dirt access road and followed it for miles until I saw power lines. I kept walking until I reached a paved road, then flagged down a utility truck. The man inside looked at me like I'd crawled out of a grave. "You all right?" he asked. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. He gave me water and let me use his phone. I told him I'd gotten lost while hiking. Left out the part about rituals and bones. He dropped me off at a ranger station a few towns over. I gave them coordinates, descriptions, everything. The ranger said I must have gotten turned around. That part of the trail system had been closed for a while due to storm damage. No one should have been out there, he said, and there aren't any communities living that deep. Closest town's 30 miles. I asked if anyone had reported strange gatherings or cult activity. He stared at me a little too long before shaking his head. "You sure you weren't dehydrated?" I didn't push it. I drove home the next day. My friends noticed I was off. I couldn't sleep for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those people standing around the fire, swaying like trees in the wind, staring into the dark like they knew something I didn't. 3 months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single object, a bundle made of twine, feathers, and bones, identical to the one I found at the base of that tree. This one was wrapped in a note. It read, "We remember. I don't go hiking anymore, and I've never gone back to the Appalachians." In September 2017, I was working freelance contracts for a geological consulting firm based out of Kentucky. Mostly, I inspected old industrial properties, checking groundwater, soil conditions, and abandoned structures for liability issues. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid well, especially if I was willing to hike into remote areas. That's how I ended up at the mouth of a long-abandoned coal mining camp deep in the mountains along the West Virginia border. The mine, called Briar Hollow, had been closed since the early 90s after a safety scandal involving faulty supports and a fatal cave-in. My assignment was to verify the area was sealed off and to test the runoff from the surrounding hills. It was supposed to be a one-day job. I drove as far as I could on a narrow dirt road, parked near an old ranger barrier, and started hiking with my gear. The last known coordinates of the mining site were still marked on some ancient maps, but when I got close, I realized nobody had been maintaining anything. No signs, no posted warnings, just silence and the faint smell of coal dust still hanging in the wind. I reached the camp around noon. The first structure I saw was a long, low building made of tin and timber, probably the old supply shack. The roof had mostly caved in, but inside I saw rusted tools, rotted gloves, and a lantern that looked disturbingly clean, like it had been picked up recently. Next came the bunkhouses, rows of them. Some still had beds, mattresses like moldy pancakes. But then I noticed something weird. Several of the beds had been made, neatly, as if someone was still staying there. One even had a folded flannel shirt laid across the pillow. I radioed back to the office, no signal. Not even a flicker. I checked my GPS, still tracking. That gave me a little comfort. I marked the camp on the device and decided to finish my job. I needed to collect water samples near the mine's runoff. That meant heading deeper into the camp, toward the main shaft. The path leading to the mine entrance had collapsed in places, but I was able to climb over and reach the gated mouth of the shaft. Or what should have been gated. The metal bars had been torn out or cut. Clean. Modern. Not 30 years old like the rest of the place. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I shined my flashlight into the entrance. The first 20 feet looked clear, timber supports holding up a narrow passage. Just beyond that, it bent to the left, vanishing into black. Something caught my attention to the right of the entrance, something carved into the rock wall. It was a symbol, circles layered within each other, intersecting lines. I didn't recognize it, but I knew it wasn't mining graffiti. It was too symmetrical, too precise. Then I saw more, small wooden figures hanging from nails along the inside posts of the tunnel. Humanoid, crude, bound with twine and what looked like animal sinew. My gut told me to leave, but I had a job. I took my samples as quickly as I could from a nearby stream, logged the data, and took photos of the structures for my report. I decided to skip entering the shaft. I was going to log it as compromised access and be done with it. I turned to head back toward my gear. That's when I heard it. Voices. Low. Whispered. Dozens of them. I stopped in my tracks, crouched low, and turned off my flashlight. From the far end of the camp, past the bunkhouses, figures emerged. I counted 5. Maybe 6. All moving slowly, like they were on patrol. None of them carried lights. None of them spoke louder than a murmur. They walked like they knew exactly where they were going. I stayed crouched behind a collapsed shack for what felt like 20 minutes. My knees ached. Every part of me wanted to bolt, but I waited until the group passed, disappearing into the darkness near the mine. When I finally made it back to my gear, I found something waiting for me. A wooden figure, just like the ones in the tunnel, placed neatly on top of my backpack. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed my gear and moved fast down the path I came in from. But something had changed. The trail was harder to follow, like someone had disturbed it, moved rocks, shifted branches. I ended up looping back once without realizing it. Found myself standing by the same broken signpost twice. It was getting darker now, and I knew I'd lose all visibility soon. I pulled out my GPS to retrace the marked route out. Dead. The screen had gone black. My radio wasn't picking up anything either, not even static. That's when I started hearing footsteps again. But they weren't behind me. They were ahead. I crouched, slowly moving off the trail, crawling into a shallow ditch covered in tall grass and brush. I stayed low, breathing as quietly as I could. 2 figures came into view, wearing miners' helmets. No lights on them, just dark silhouettes, walking steadily past the ditch like they were following a perimeter. One of them was humming. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore, and then doubled back, taking a steep side slope down the mountain. I didn't care if I rolled an ankle. I just wanted out. About halfway down, I fell hard, slid a few yards, and slammed into something solid. A wooden post, buried in the ground, painted red. Tied to it with twine and wire were dozens of bones, some animal, some not, arranged in patterns. I looked up. Behind me, not more than 30 feet up the hill, one of the figures stood watching. I ran. Hard. No trail. No direction. Just down. Branches tore at my clothes, rocks scraped my hands. But I didn't stop until I hit the creek bed near where I'd parked. My truck was still there, but the driver's side door was wide open. I didn't care. I jumped in, slammed the door, locked it, and turned the key. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. I threw it into reverse, nearly tearing off my bumper as I backed down the trail and sped down the dirt road, fishtailing on every turn. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 2 towns over. Inside, I sat in the bathroom for nearly 30 minutes, shaking. There was dirt in my ears, blood on my elbows, and that figure, the wooden one from before, was still in my pocket. I must have shoved it there in a panic. I called my contact at the firm, gave him the basics: structures intact, access compromised, no safe path. I didn't mention anything else. 2 days later, I got a call from a private number. A man's voice. Calm. Firm. "We got your report. Briar Hollow's not your site anymore. Don't go back." Then they hung up. When I tried to follow up, the office told me my contract for that region had been closed. Nothing else. No questions allowed. A few weeks later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a manila envelope with photos. Photos of me, walking toward the mine, crouched behind the shack, running down the path. Someone had been watching me the whole time. The last photo was a close-up of the wooden figure on my backpack. I burned it that night. I've done a dozen more jobs since then, but I've never taken another one in the Appalachians. Whatever's living in Briar Hollow, it's not gone. It's just waiting. I was sent to the Blue Ridge Mountains for what should have been a routine environmental assessment, soil checks, runoff collection, that kind of thing. Just a solo hike, a clipboard, and some field gear. But 2 hours in, I realized something wasn't right. There were no birds, no insects, just complete, heavy stillness. That mountain wasn't empty. It was waiting. I work as a field technician for a small environmental firm that contracts with private landowners and energy companies. Most of my jobs involve assessing the ecological impact of proposed construction sites, logging roads, small hydro projects, even cabin developments. I've been sent all over Appalachia for years and never had an issue. Until last fall, when I was sent to survey an area in the upper reaches of the Blue Ridge near a place called Jackson's Fork. This part of the mountains sits just on the edge of where most tourists stop exploring. Beyond the overlooked trails and scenic drives, it turns into real wilderness, deep woods, no cell towers, minimal maintenance. The landowner was considering turning the tract into a glamping site. They needed to know if there were any risks, landslides, protected flora, anything that could delay permits. I drove out on a Friday morning with plans to finish the job by nightfall. I never should have gone alone. I parked my truck on a logging spur and loaded up with my kit: soil probes, GPS unit, portable water tester, and just enough gear in case I needed to overnight it. I started up the slope on a game trail that cut across the ridge. At first, everything seemed normal. Damp leaves underfoot, patches of sunlight filtering through a high canopy, and the occasional squirrel darting through underbrush. But as I climbed higher, things changed. The air got thicker, almost humid, even though the temperature hadn't shifted. I realized I hadn't heard a single bird in over an hour. No buzzing insects, no distant hawk calls, just my boots crunching deadfall. Then I noticed something odd, a ring of stones near the base of a hemlock, arranged perfectly. Not naturally. Someone had placed them there. I marked it in my notebook and kept going. About 3 miles in, I came across what looked like the remnants of an old hunting shack. The roof had collapsed and most of the wood was rotten, but inside I found an old stove and the rusted frame of a cot. But here's the thing, on the stove was a metal pot. Clean. No rust. Recently used. Next to it, a tin mug. Inside, still damp coffee grounds. That's when my instincts kicked in. I wasn't alone out there. I backed out of the shack and scanned the woods. No one in sight, but a few yards from the shack, tucked behind a thicket of rhododendrons, I found a narrow path. No markers, no signs, just a break in the brush leading deeper into the trees. Against better judgment, I followed it. The trail narrowed and steepened. About 20 minutes later, I came into a clearing so quiet it felt like someone had pressed mute on the world. At the center stood a tall wooden pole, more like a totem, wrapped in vines and decorated with feathers, bones, and strips of cloth. At its base, a small wooden box lit ajar. I approached carefully. Inside the box were dozens of small figures, humanoid carvings, all bound with twine. Each had a different symbol carved into its chest. Some had tiny pins stuck in the arms. Others had been burned or split in half. I started backing away when I heard it. A snap. Behind me, maybe 30 feet, something large moved through the trees. I ducked low, heart thudding so loud I could barely hear my own breath. Whoever, or whatever, it was didn't speak, didn't run, just moved, slow and deliberate, behind the tree-line. Then I heard a second movement. Closer. That's when I realized it wasn't a single person. It was several. I dropped my pack and ran. I tore downhill through brush and thorns, stumbling, cutting my hands on rocks and branches. I didn't care. I had to get back to the ridge and find my way to the truck. I didn't stop to look back. Every time I slowed, I heard movement behind me, twigs snapping, dry leaves crunching, heavy footsteps pacing mine. By the time I reached the lower trail again, I was out of breath and bleeding from my legs and arms. My GPS was still strapped to my chest. I flipped it open, hoping to orient myself, but it was dead. I hadn't turned it off. The screen was still glowing dimly when I dropped my pack. Now it was black. I kept running until I hit the old ring of stones I'd seen earlier. But something was different now. More stones had been added, and in the middle sat one of the small wooden figures from the box in the clearing. Except this one had something else carved into it. My initials. I froze. There's no way anyone could have made that in the time it took me to run down. It had been waiting. A low hum began echoing through the trees, soft, rhythmic. Not words, just vibrations, like a chant with no mouth behind it. I turned and sprinted the rest of the way to my truck. When I broke through the tree line and saw it sitting at the edge of the logging spur, I nearly collapsed in relief. Then I saw the driver's door. Open. No damage. No forced entry. Just open, like someone had been inside. The seat had been moved, too far back, and on the passenger seat sat my notebook. I had it in my coat pocket when I dropped the pack. I was sure of it. Now it was open to a blank page, and something had been written on it in thick, shaky black ink. Stay out of the high woods. I drove for 2 straight hours before I stopped. Didn't care about the rough road or the risk to my axle. I just wanted distance. When I finally got to a ranger outpost near a reservoir, I reported what I found, without the strange parts. I said someone might be squatting in the area. Mentioned the fire pit, the shack, the trail. They nodded and took notes, but didn't seem surprised. One ranger, older guy, pulled me aside when the others went back inside. He asked me where exactly I'd been. I told him. His face didn't change, but his voice dropped. "We don't patrol up there anymore," he said. "Not since 2008. Too many missing persons. Too much bad luck." I asked what kind of people had gone missing. He just said, the ones who went too far off trail. Like they walked right out of the world. Back home, I filed my report. My company reviewed it. Then I got a message. The landowner had canceled the development. No explanation. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. It showed the pole in the clearing, the box, and something else. A person, facing away, standing beside the pole with one hand raised toward it. On the back of the photo, someone had scrawled, "You were not supposed to see this." I haven't taken another contract in that region since. I don't hike alone anymore, and I don't go anywhere near the high woods of the Blue Ridge. I've worked a dozen Backwoods assignments in my life. Illegal moonshine stills, missing persons, even cult rumors. But nothing prepared me for what I found in that forgotten stretch of Appalachia. I was sent in alone, told it was just a routine follow-up on some abandoned properties and an uncooperative local sheriff. No mention of the burned-out cars, the empty homes, or why the post office hadn't run a delivery in 6 months. They told me to go quiet, not to stir things up. But something was already watching by the time I crossed the county line. This was fall 2018. I was with a federal investigative team that works under a lesser-known agency branch, sort of a hybrid between census enforcement and federal land management. Most of our assignments were mundane, verifying claims, checking property lines, occasionally rooting out illegal squatters on public land. This one came with almost no paperwork, just a printed packet from my supervisor, a map, and a handwritten note that read, "Monitor Owsley County, 9-mile stretch near Shade Creek. Keep a low profile. Sheriff's Office unresponsive." I took my Jeep up into Kentucky the next morning. I'd been to parts of Appalachia before, rough terrain, isolation, generations of families living in hollows that don't show up on Google Earth. But this felt different from the start. The further in I drove, the more it seemed like time had folded in on itself. Rusted-out trucks sat halfway swallowed by weeds. Mailboxes leaned on their last hinges. There were homes along the winding one-lane road, but no signs of life, no dogs, no kids, no lights. Just silence and trees, and the road climbing higher like it didn't want to be found. I reached the area marked on my map around 2:45 p.m. Shade Creek was more of a logging path than an actual road. The tree canopy was so thick I had to turn on my headlights. It wasn't raining, but the forest held this heavy wetness in the air, like fog but thicker, sour-smelling. I parked near a collapsed barn and started walking. The report listed 12 properties, old homesteads registered from the 1940s to the early 80s. I found 8 of them, all abandoned, doors wide open. Furniture left behind like folks had stepped out for groceries and never returned. One kitchen still had plates in the drying rack. But what caught me off guard were the photographs. In every house, I found framed photos turned face down. Some scattered across the floor, others neatly stacked under beds. Never hung, never displayed, faces scratched out in most. Sometimes the entire head was blackened with what looked like soot or burned grease. It wasn't just one house either, it was all of them. I kept notes and took some pictures, then hiked down toward the creek, which had mostly dried up. That's where I found the first car. It was an old Crown Vic, rusted to hell, state plate peeled off, but it still had a police light mount. Something told me not to open the trunk. I noted the VIN, snapped a few photos, and backed away. Less than a mile down, I came across another car, this one flipped and half charred. When I circled to the driver's side, I saw the sheriff's badge still pinned to what was left of a vest wedged under the seat. By now it was close to 5 p.m., and I was about ready to head back. I hadn't seen another living soul all day, and the forest had gone deathly quiet. No birds, no crickets, just this low, humming sound that I kept telling myself was wind through the trees. I started the hike back uphill, but I swear the trail had changed. A tree I'd marked with a piece of red tape was missing, or I had missed it. I tried GPS, but there was nothing, just a spinning buffer and a blinking red error. That's when I heard movement, clear footfalls, not animals scurrying. Slow, deliberate. Someone was pacing me from the ridge above. I stopped, turned, waited. Silence. When I moved again, the footfalls returned. I kept my hand near the small revolver on my belt, not drawing it but not forgetting it either. I didn't shout or call out. Something in my gut told me not to. I picked up my pace, eyes darting to the woods around me. That's when I saw the cabin. It wasn't on the map. Tucked into a slope, half covered in brush, it looked older than the others, maybe late 1800s. Hand-hewn logs, no electricity. The door was slightly open. I should have kept walking, but I didn't. I stepped inside. The air was rank with mold and something else, like iron and old rot. The front room had no furniture, just piles of folded clothing stacked neatly in the corners. Men's jackets, work boots, women's aprons, all clean, all unlabeled, like someone had collected them. In the far corner, there was a wooden chair facing the wall. It was worn down in the middle, like it had been sat in for years. On the wall above it were dozens of names carved deep into the wood. First names only. One of them was mine. Daniel. That's when I heard the door shut behind me. I spun around, gun drawn, heart pounding in my throat. The door was closed, latched from the inside, but no one had passed me. No creak, no draft, just shut. I tried the latch. It wouldn't budge. I kicked the bottom, nothing. Would like stone. That humming sound returned, louder now, coming from behind the wall with the names. A droning pulse, low but rhythmic, like breathing. I stepped back. Then I heard it, a voice. Barely a whisper at first, coming from behind the wall. Daniel, you're late. The voice was slow, drawn out, almost like it was mimicking how a person talks but didn't fully understand tone. It repeated the same phrase, you're late, over and over, changing pitch each time like it was practicing. I backed up toward the front room and saw something move between the slats of the wall. Not a person, not clearly, just movement, like something tall was standing right behind it, casting a shadow I couldn't explain. I aimed at the wall and shouted, "Federal agent, don't move." The voice stopped instantly. Then all the names on the wall began to weep. I mean that literally. Dark liquid oozed from each letter carved into the wood. Dozens of names, including mine, bleeding down in thin trails onto the floor. I heard footsteps now, inside the wall, pacing from left to right. And then I saw fingers, bone-thin, pale fingers, slip through one of the slats. Just resting there, motionless. I fired once. The report was deafening. The wood splintered, but the fingers didn't flinch. No recoil, no sound, just the slow humming, louder now. I turned and kicked the door with everything I had, again and again. Finally, the latch snapped, and I burst into the fading daylight. Outside, the forest was wrong. The sky wasn't right. It had this sickly yellow tint, and the trees leaned in slightly, like they were all tilting toward the cabin. I ran. I didn't look back. I got to the Jeep in record time, and tore out down the trail, engine screaming as brush scraped the sides. I didn't stop until I saw asphalt. I filed the report the next day. My supervisor read it, didn't ask a single question, then quietly took the folder and walked out. A week later, I got reassigned to an office job in Missouri, no explanation. All my digital photos were corrupted, just static and black screens. Even the ones I took of the houses. The only thing that remained was the handwritten map, and on that map, the section where Shade Creek had been was covered in whiteout. I did some digging later. The sheriff listed in the original file never existed, at least not in any employment records. And the badge I saw in the car, it was an old design, hadn't been used since the 60s. When I tried to contact local authorities, I was told there was no active population out there. The last census listed the area as uninhabitable terrain. But I saw clothes. I saw homes with food still in the pantry. And I saw my name on a wall before I ever arrived. I still get mail sometimes. No return address. Just a small envelope with a single strip of paper inside. Always the same handwriting. Always the same phrase. You're late. Last month, one of them came with a photo. It was a blurry black and white image of that cabin. But this time, the door was wide open. And sitting in that chair, facing the wall, was a man in a jacket that looked exactly like the one I'd worn that day. I haven't told anyone. Not really. Who'd believe it? But I haven't slept in months. And sometimes, in the middle of the night, I still hear that voice, low, distant, humming through the trees. Daniel, you're late.